predestination and free will are contradictory concepts. With predestination, you have a destiny fixed in advance. It's planned before it happens. And if it's predestined to occur, it therefore must occur, and it's guaranteed to occur. Versus with free will, it's the power to always do other than what you did. So you can quickly see here that if something is predestined to occur, but somebody that's maybe involved with that event, and if he supposedly has libertarian free will, then he could therefore thwart and therefore stop the predestination from happening. Basically, at that point, you're making your own destiny. Clearly, for example, in Ephesians 1:5, it says, having predestinated us unto the adoption of children by Jesus Christ to himself. So it's God's the one who predestinated us unto this. So if we have libertarian free will, we'd be able to escape this predestination. So again, that's a real problem. So again, free will can do A and B. Predestination can only do A, is a way to think of that. So that's a critical component here. Recognizing that predestination is it's purposed in advance, and the outcome is guaranteed to occur and will occur. Versus with free will, it's just incompatible with predestination because you could have done A, you could have done B, you could have done C. You know what I mean? You could have done anything other than what was predestined. Is the point. And so, because the Bible speaks of things that are predestinated, Acts 2, Acts 4 shows us clearly that the crucifixion of Jesus was predestined to occur. So therefore, those who crucified Jesus did not have free will to do other than what they did. They had to do what they did. Now, granted, obviously they're held responsible for what they do, but that's despite the predestination of it, not necessarily in light of it, if that makes sense. Of course, they did what they did because of predestination. Nevertheless, they're held accountable for their actions. Now, free will, inherently, we can understand as humans, if free will is true in the libertarian sense, at least on the surface, it makes sense. Oh, well, that's why man can be held accountable, because he could have done other than what he did. So that's the interesting thing about that. But the reality is the Bible speaks of predestination. And again, Romans 9 very clearly is talking about predestination. And, we're unconditionally created as either vessels of mercy or vessels of wrath. And God finds fault with the vessels of wrath, and he therefore, because he creates them as such, he also in time hardens their hearts so that they sin, and yet he still finds fault with them. So he still holds them responsible, accountable, and blameworthy, even though they could not have done otherwise. And that's that shows you, truly who's God at that point. God is the one who can do that. Okay, that actually makes sense. That if anyone in the world can get away with that, it's God, because he's the creator. If he's truly is the creator of all things, therefore all things are determined, all things are predestinated, and all things happen according to his purpose. Versus with libertarian free will, that's really a world in which man has the power and the ability to purpose things, and God is the one who's constantly being thwarted because of mankind. But the point is, because the Bible clearly teaches predestination, you then have to decide, well, are either just some things predestined to occur, or are all things predestinated? Well, Ephesians 1:11, and also we have obtained an inheritance, being predestinated according to the purpose of him who worketh all things after the counsel of his own will. And then Romans chapter 8 speaks of, we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. Again, all things are predestined. And then also just, if you don't believe that on a practical level, how then can we have comfort and assurance that what we experience in our own lives is not part of, all things work together for good to them that love God. You have to bring this down to a practical level, that all things are the way they are because it's got purpose that they are be that way. Again, unconditionally, they are that way. It's not just merely, well, I'll just decide to allow merely, all this terrible things to happen. No, there's a purpose behind all that. As for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good. Meant it shows predestination, not just, oh, I'm reacting to a situation that was really evil that mankind came up. Joseph's brothers, came up of themselves, and now I just have to work with that and turn things around as best I can. No, God meant it, therefore predestined it unto good. So yeah, it's just, and then think about this too, like because we've just established that, hey, predestination versus free will, contradictory concepts. So if some things are predestined to occur, and then they involve sinful actions of mankind, such as the crucifixion of Christ, Acts 2, Acts 4, and yet they're held responsible, well, again, they had to do what they did because they were predestined to do it, yet they're still held accountable. So you're already now, in that specific event, you're on the, you've already stepped into the quote-unquote Calvinist view, okay, the consistent Calvinist view. Because they were predestined to sin, therefore they could not do otherwise. So they're held responsible for doing, even though they didn't have the power to stop themselves from doing that. That's just the way it works. Versus, the next moment supposedly they have free will, now they're responsible. No, that's ridiculous. All things are predestined to occur. Okay, that's just the simplicity of it. So again, all things predestined to occur, and yet despite that, we're still held responsible for our actions because God's God. He can do as He pleases. So I hope that's a help. Again, understand the simplicity that predestination and free will, contradictory concepts. And if you disagree with me on that, again, you shouldn't disagree, but there's really only two ways to handle that. It's either to say, oh, predestination can be thwarted, or the free will can be thwarted by predestination. So you don't really have great options to do if you disagree with me on that I believe all things are predestined to occur. All things have purpose. Okay, all things have been predestined, fixed in advance, and yet we're still held responsible despite that, because that's what God pleases us to do. Now, again, for those who have trouble with that, at least recognize that the way we experience life, we very much feel that we have the ability to do other than what we did. So maybe instead of saying, oh, well, predestination of all things is true, then, therefore I shouldn't be held responsible for what I do. Well, instead of that attitude, a fatalistic attitude, why not just be like, in light of this truth, how should I live? Why not just do that? Live as if you have the ability to do otherwise, and understand that the way we think, again, understand the the whole idea of doing other than what you did, but also understand the purpose of God, that things are predestined to occur, and take comfort in that, because all things work together for good to them that love God. So if you're saved, you're a Christian, understand that no matter what happens, that is ultimately for your good. Again, you may have done something evil in the moment, but again, what they meant for evil, God meant it unto good. Okay? From Genesis 50, Joseph's brothers, they thought evil against him, and they did evil against him, but God meant for them to do that unto good, to save much people alive. So even if we don't understand a certain purpose of why something happened in this life, well, just trust that there is an answer for why something occurred. In fact, it may not even become manifest in your lifetime. Maybe it'll be generations down the road that if they knew what you did, they'd be able to trace the events that happened and see, oh, well, that's why this happened. And there can also be multiple purposes behind things anyway. But just simply trust that God is in control, truly in control, not just, just merely allowing things to happen. No, God's active in this. He's predestinated all things to take place according to the counsel of his own will. Take comfort in that, and at the same time recognize that you're responsible for what you do. I mean, you very much feel that, well, I could have just as easily sinned or not sinned. We very much think that. We feel that the way we experience life and relate to others, but again, we need to understand the purpose of God in all things, and just because we feel one thing doesn't mean that's actually how it is. So take advantage of the way we kind of understand the world and relate to the world, as far as the possibilities of doing other than what we did, but at the same time recognize that, hey, there's purpose in all things that happen, and that's taking place according to God's power and purpose. So hope that's a help. Amen.